It's very good to see each and every one of you out this evening. We do have visitors with us. We appreciate you being here and invite you to come back whenever you have the opportunity. I'd also like to begin by commending Dylan for his lesson this morning. I thought it was great, both in the presentation and the content of it. He did a very good job. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate all the writing that he does. If you have not seen the bulletin that Brother Hall put out this week, he has an article in there, and it was a very good article, so I appreciate him and all the work that he's doing. The basis for our lesson this evening, I've taken it from a merit badge that I taught here locally a few months ago. If you know anything about Scouts, you know that the local troop is really controlled heavily by the local organization. And so Scouting can be just as conservative or as liberal as that local organization is. But in an effort to kind of appease some of the political correctness, BSA came out with a new merit badge over the last year or so, and they've called that merit badge Citizenship in Society. And so what we decided to do, they required this merit badge for any scout who was going to earn Eagle. And so what we decided in our troop to do was to teach that here locally. That way we could kind of control what the boys were hearing. And as we began discussing how we were going to go about it, we were kind of almost laughing it off as a joke because there wasn't a lot to it. It was very open-ended, a lot of vague things, and I think they designed it that way so that you could really do with it what you wanted to do. And so the portion that I was assigned, I was very tempted just to kind of brush it off and do something very simple and just not take a lot of time with it. But as I got to thinking, I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to interact with some guys on a biblical nature as far as sharing scriptures and things like that. And so I decided to make sort of a Bible class out of my portion. And it went very well. It was received very well by the young men there. And so the more I thought about it, I thought, well, this is something I think that each of us needs as we endeavor to navigate the society in which we find ourselves in right now, a society that is really pushing a lot of this political correctness and things of that nature. And so I want to share with you to begin with the portion that I was teaching and then kind of delve into this. And I've expanded on a lot of these things, added some things, and kind of went a little bit different direction, it not being a class format. But the bare bones of what I have to present here is what I presented to the boys when we did the merit badge. So the portion that I was assigned was number 11 there. And it says, Scouting strives to develop young people to be the future leaders in their workplace, schools, and community environments. As you look at your current involvement in school, your family, Scouting, your job, and/or community, think about how you can have a positive impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think we wouldn't really have to use a lot of our imagination to know where the writers and designers of this merit badge were going with that last section there. How that we can have a positive impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And certainly, I think these things need to be discussed. And I think there needs to be, inclusion and equity and things of that nature when we look at racial differences and things of that sort. And we've studied and we've talked about that here. But I think what we have today is our society is trying to move past that and pushing some things which we as Christians cannot condone. And we cannot really promote this inclusive sort of attitude that people are expecting us to do today. And so what I would like to do is look at this and see, as a Christian in modern society, how do we interact? How do we go about portraying a Christian attitude, but yet not compromising the things that we know to be truth? and to stand up for things that we need to stand up for. To begin with, a simple question that I think we all need to be asking ourselves is, how do we identify ourselves? Identity is a word that we hear a lot today. You hear it a lot. It is one of the buzzwords that people use, identify as such and so, such and such. And the idea of personal identity is not new, and the concept in and of itself is not wrong. Yet now somehow we have some who have attempted to elevate a personal identity to a sort of law, whereby you have to abide by the stipulations of my identity and you have to accept that. It's a law by which one can bind their views, however skewed they may be, onto others. When you ask someone, well, how do you identify? You might get numerous answers. They may say, well, I identify as a black person or a white person, a Hispanic or an Asian person. They may say, well, I'm an American or I'm Canadian, I'm Italian. I identify as my nationality. Some people's identity is related to their job. I'm a welder, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. Others might be related to their favorite sports team or favorite sport. I'm a football player, I play basketball. And so their identity is kind of tied up into those things. Some of these things we can change, others we cannot. We could change our profession, we could change our sports alliance and things of that nature, but we're not able to change our birth. We're not able to change our race. And however much we might want to do that, we're not really able to perform those things. And so sometimes things that identify us are unchangeable. Increasingly, many are using their sexual orientation to identify themselves. In recent years, many have used identity as a way to attempt to change themselves into something else. Many who are male say that they are identifying as female, and many who are female are saying they identify as male now, and they want us to accept that. Some say they are gender fluid or non-binary, and this means that they see themselves as not having a fixed gender. Some even identify themselves as animals, and they want to be treated as such. It's not my intent this evening to deal with any of these specific topics. For the purpose of this lesson, I'm going to assume that everyone here understands the flaws in some of the things that I've just mentioned. The direction that I want to go has more to do with our place as Christians in a society full of people who are attempting to do the things and attempting to identify and change themselves into the things that we have just mentioned. How do we as Christians interact with others who are creating these identities that we know to be wrong and unscriptural? In some instances, disagreement with how someone identifies themselves can be considered hate speech. So how do we live and function in a society with an ever-increasing demand for us to accept the things that we just mentioned? More importantly, how do we reach those who are making these demands of us and share the gospel with them? Because ultimately, that's what we need to be doing. I believe first we must be confident in our identity in Christ. How does our identity affect how we live? We, first and foremost, should identify as a Christian. And in doing so, that is going to drastically affect how you and I live and how we interact with other people. Every aspect of how we live and conduct ourselves should be affected by the fact that we wear the name Christian. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5 says, you also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So we are being built up as a holy house, a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. And so we are God's special people. You look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but now are the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. So as Christians, we are God's chosen people. Because we have been called out of darkness and are recipients of God's glorious mercies, we proclaim his praises. Everything we do is affected by the one we serve. Every action we take should be taken in light of the name that we wear. Colossians 3 and verse 17, and whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And so looking or considering this, let's look at how our interaction with others is affected by our identity as Christians. A question that I asked as I was teaching the merit badge was if anybody knew what the two greatest commandments were for a Christian. I think most of us, if not all of us in here, know what those two commands are. Mark chapter 12, verses 30 through 31. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. The two greatest commandments, love God, love your neighbor. And so, as we go and we interact with other people who are identifying as these things that we know to be wrong, as we interact with those people, we should be doing so with these two great commands in mind. Loving God and loving them. When you look at the biblical definition of love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8, we see that love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And so it's with this type of love that we should be interacting with our neighbor. It's with this type of love that we should be approaching those who are trying to bind these identities upon us. And so we might ask the question, well, who is our neighbor? Well, we know that our neighbor are those that we come in contact with everywhere. Jesus was asked the same question, and he responded with the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. I'm not going to take the time to read that parable, but we all know the parable. Here you have this man that goes and he's traveling. He falls among thieves. They rob him. They take his clothes. They take all of his money, everything, and they leave him wounded on the side of the road. You have a priest and a Levite who come by, and they look at him, and instead of helping him, they pass by on the other side. But then you have this Samaritan that comes and he ministers unto him. He binds him up. He puts oil on his wounds. He takes him to an inn and pays for his care, and said he would return and pay anything extra later. And so at the end of the parable, Christ asked, well, who was the neighbor to this one that fell among the thieves? And of course, the answer is the Samaritan, because he was the one that helped him. And so we are to love our neighbor. We ask the question, well, who is our neighbor? Well, it is those that we come in contact with that we have an opportunity to love. And so here we see that Jesus uses national identity to prove a point. You look at who the Samaritans were. The Samaritans were despised by the Jews. And of course, at this point, Christ is telling this parable, I believe, to the Jews. And so he's using this Samaritan, this nationality that the Jews despised, to prove a point. The Samaritans were half Jew, half Gentiles. The Jews considered them unclean. They avoided them, and they even looked down upon them. And Christ used this despised people to prove a point. And what was that point? That no matter who they are, where they are from, or what color their skin is, they are our neighbor. Therefore, we approach them with love, and we need to help those whom we have the opportunity to help, whether they look like us or not. So this is a valuable point. We are to interact with others with love. If we see someone who is different than us, our first reaction should be love. We don't assume that they're automatically bad. We don't assume that they automatically have some sort of agenda or something that they're going to try to press on us. We don't automatically assume that they are dumb or worthless. We interact with them with love. We emulate the Samaritan, and we do what we can to help those we come in contact with. When we look at the example of Christ, what we often see is that Christ led with love. And what do I mean by leading with love? Well, when we look at several times that Christ was interacting with sinners, with social outcasts, time after time, he began with some sort of expression of love or compassion. Think about it. The adulterous woman in John 8. They were trying to stone her for her adultery. Did you see the compassion there? The Samaritan woman in John 4. If you remember that story, his disciples were kind of amazed that he was even speaking to this woman, but yet Christ approached her. And he held this very loving conversation with her. And that conversation bore much fruit. You look at Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. Here you have this publican up in a tree, and what does Christ do? He says, Zacchaeus, I want to go home and eat with you. I'm coming to your house. It was often his habit to even share a meal with these sort of people. You look at Mark chapter 2, verses 15 through 16. It says, Now it happened as he was dining in Levi's house that many tax collectors and sinners also sat together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eating with the tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, How is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners? I don't know if we can truly appreciate what Christ was doing here without kind of really understanding how the Jews, and this is Christ's own people, this was kind of the religious society of that day, how they felt about publicans or tax collectors. I read an article on BibleStudyTools.com, and it had this to say about them. It says, according to John MacArthur, the tax collectors often strong-armed money out of people with the use of thugs. Most were despicable, vile, unprincipled scoundrels. The tax collector Zacchaeus even confessed to Jesus upon his conversion that he would give back to everyone he had defrauded, seemingly confirming the habit of extortion tax collectors like him were known for. Social and religious outcasts, the tax collectors were the most despised individuals in Israel. Men deemed lower than the Herodians and even the Roman soldiers, and ones regarded on the same level as harlots and prostitutes. According to John MacArthur, tax collectors had to keep their distance from any group because they were so hated. The Jewish Talmud taught that it was righteous to lie and deceive a tax collector because that was what a professional extortioner deserved. The fact that Jesus would interact and even dine with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners of similar ilk would have been considered unacceptable and even shameful. And on more than one occasion, the Pharisees voiced their displeasure with Jesus for gathering with such scoundrels. So you can imagine when a Pharisee looked in and saw Christ sitting around a table with tax collectors, with people that they considered just as low as that. No, they would have seen him associating with those whom they considered to be the cause of much of the moral decline in their society. They would have been appalled that anyone professing godliness would be caught in a social setting with people of this source. But Christ knew that these were the people who needed the gospel the most. In Mark 2 and verse 17, it says, when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. The sin didn't keep him from loving the sinner. In these instances, we see his first priority was to assure the sinner of his love. He didn't lead with condemnation. He didn't have to clear the air before he sat down to eat with them. Those things would come, but only after he led with love in these instances. Think about it. You know, I've thought about this question a lot over the last few months. If Christ were here today, would he be called at a table with homosexuals and those who consider themselves transgender? Would he go into their homes? Would he see them as a segment of society that needed him the most? I think it's a question worth asking. How would he interact with those people? However we interact with them, we need to be endeavoring to do so as Christ did, with love. But yet, our love for someone does not mean that we must accept their views or their sin. While Christ led with love, he followed with truth. He spoke truth with the Samaritan woman of John chapter 4. To the adulterous woman of John chapter 8, he said, go and sin no more. After showing his love by healing a man, Christ later found him and said in John chapter 5 and verse 14, see, you have been made well, sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. His teachings were so difficult that we read in John chapter 6 and verse 66 that it says, from that time many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. And so these people, I'm not saying that the things he was teaching were too difficult, but for these people it was. They found them to the point where they just quit following him. They didn't like what he was saying. And so even though our Savior was a loving man, he followed with truth and he spoke truth. Truth must come. It may cost us relationships or more. Christ was not afraid or ashamed to show love to everyone. Likewise, he was not afraid or ashamed to share the truth with them as well. Again, we must follow his example and not compromise the truth. We must understand that God is the source of truth. Jesus praying to God in John chapter 17 and verse 17 says, sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. He also speaks of himself as truth in John chapter 14 and verse 16. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Christ is a mirror of God. When we look at him, we see God. Both are sources of truth. When we want to know where to go to find truth, we go to the Scripture. That's where it can be found. That's where we go. You look at man's idea of truth, and that changes almost, seems like on a daily basis. But man's truth changes. God's truth does not. It's eternal. It's everlasting. It's the same. When we look at religions such as the religion of Islam or the Jewish religion that we see in today's time, we can't compromise the truth with these sort of people, with people claiming to be Jews or Muslims. Both claim that Christ is not deity. How can we compromise that one teaching there? No matter what the rest of the religion says, both of them claim that Christ is not deity, that Christ is not the Son of God. And so we can't compromise that one truth, much less all the other deceptions that they have in their religion now. And so we can't agree with that. How do we as Christians respond with these people? Well, first with love. We remember what love was. But just because another person says or believes something, that doesn't mean that we accept it. That doesn't mean that we go and we join with them and we make them to feel that we think that they're okay in doing and practicing what they are. We can't condone religions which deny the deity of Christ. And just because someone identifies as something, that too does not mean that we have to accept it. We must love them. We must respect them as a human in God's creation, just like we are. We can't physically harm them. We must not persecute them, but we do not have to condone and accept their beliefs if they go against Scripture. We do not and we must not condone their beliefs. Modern views of religion say, well, you practice and believe what you want, and I'll believe and practice what I want, and we'll just agree to disagree. We all get along, and we're all serving the same God in the end, right? Have you ever heard anybody say that? We're just doing it in different ways. We're all serving the same God and doing it in different ways. I think we all can see the fallacy of that. We live in a free country. We have the right to do this, and I'm glad we live in a country which allows us to worship God in a way that we believe to be right. But that doesn't mean that just because I believe one way and you believe one way that we're all eventually going to go to the same place. That's just wrong. And we could spend an entire lesson looking and studying that. Some say if you do not believe the same as me, then you have no right to tell me I'm wrong. You have no right to tell me that I'm wrong in my beliefs. Some say that if I tell you that I identify as a rock, you have no right to tell me that I'm not a rock. This ideology is neither Christian nor American for that matter. If someone is at fault, the most loving thing we can do for that person, remember, we're interacting with love. If we truly love that person that's at fault, then we are going to try to help them see the error of their ways. We're going to try to help them understand where they are wrong. James chapter 5, verses 19 through 20 says, "Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sin." In my opinion, the ultimate expression of love would be for you to turn me from sin and to save my soul. What is a more loving thing that we could do for another than that? Everything else pales in comparison. What better thing can one human do for another than to teach them the truth? We also need to understand that once we begin compromising the truth, we open a door that's difficult to close. Where we stand on things like hair length and the covering could have an impact on our effectiveness in standing against homosexuality. Let me say that again. Where we stand on things like hair length and the covering could have an impact on our effectiveness in standing against homosexuality. I read a book by a man who was defending gay Christians. One of his main arguments was how that almost all those claiming to be Christians disregard the restrictions on hair length and the command for women to wear a covering while praying. His point was that if these things can be written off as customs of the day, then the prohibition on homosexuality can as well. And so we begin compromising little truths here and there. And that compromise begins to snowball. And then we end up in a society in which we are today where everything goes, because once you compromise, you've opened that door. And once that door is open, it's difficult to close that door. The denominational world has already lost the battle against homosexuality. With their acceptance of unscriptural divorce and fornication, they are holding the door open for homosexuality. Allowing one sexual deviance clears the path for all others. And there's probably not a denomination in this town that would take a proper stand on a member who is in fornication or is in an adulterous marriage. And so they're allowing one sexual deviance. Homosexuality is just another. And so that door is wide open for that to come in. I spoke with a member of a local denomination in town here, and he made this exact point. Once you start down this road, there's really no way to turn back unless you go back to the Scripture and allow it to be your stopping point. You think about stopping points. And you think about where things are going in our society. And once you begin opening doors, how that they're hard to close, and before you know it, some pretty unspeakable things are happening. Brandy brought this to my attention last night. Do you know that Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville has a pediatric transgender clinic? A pediatric transgender clinic. I don't want to get too graphic, but they, in recent statements, hospital officials have defended gender-affirming surgery for minors. In a quote by one hospital official, it says, "For some of our patients, their gender dysphoria is so severe that the quality of life is just so bad anyways without these surgeries." VUMC medical student Rishabh Das told the Nashville Post, "Even if it does mean that they have a small complication or if they have an extended hospital stay, they're willing to take that risk because they just need it." So we're talking about gender-affirming surgeries. Like I said, I don't want to get too graphic, but I think we can imagine what's going on there. Once you open that door, this is a pediatric transgender clinic. Where do we stop? Where do we pump the brakes? We're careening down a hill. And we cannot find ourselves in a situation where we're condoning these things. Once we start, there's no stopping. We often hear people say, well, you can't judge me. You can't judge me. You can't judge my belief. You can't judge the way I'm living. You have no right to judge me. This is a judgment-free zone. Is that biblical? Again, John chapter 7 and verse 24 says, do not judge according to appearance, but what? But judge with righteous judgment. So there is clearly a judgment by which we can judge people and situations. This passage really gets to the point of what we are talking about when we try to understand, well, what is righteous judgment? What does it mean to judge righteous judgment? Well, that means judging according to truth. Where does righteousness originate? Righteousness originates with God. He is the author of it. He is the author of truth. And so any judgment we can make, if we can trace it back and judge righteous judgment, judge it according to the truth, then yes, we have the right to make that judgment, to judge that situation and to judge the things that are going on. If God's word clearly says a particular action is wrong and I see someone committing that action, I can say that person is wrong in doing what they are doing. But if you're judging righteous judgment, you're not going to just see someone do something and condemn it without really speaking to them or trying to figure out the situation in many times. Because when we go off and we start judging everybody and we're really not investigating, sometimes we're not going to judge righteous judgment. So judging righteous judgment means that we're going to have to do a little work. We may have to do a little investigation. We may have to have some hard conversations with some people. If we're judging righteous judgment, it may cause us to go and speak with them and make sure that what I thought I saw was what really happened. Did you actually do that? Or did I actually hear you say that? Did I misunderstand the situation? You know, what exactly did you mean when you said that? Or exactly what was the circumstances surrounding that? We're going to go and we're going to confirm that what took place was really what we thought had happened. We may need to try to understand their motive. Now, I'm not saying that just if we have a motive, a good motive to lie, then it's okay for us to lie. But yet, sometimes the motive does change the situation in some instances. There again, I'm not promoting situational ethics, but there are some situations where the motive might change how we think or feel about a situation. And so we're going to try to understand that. We're going to listen and see, and there again, understand the viewpoint, the reasons, things of that nature. And then we are going to approach the situation with love. And in doing these things and in comparing the action that has taken place with the Scripture, then at that point, a righteous judgment can be made. James chapter 1 and verse 19 says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. At some point when we reach a full understanding, we can make a judgment. And that judgment can be righteous. It is possible. The Scripture says it is. And so we should endeavor to make all of our judgment righteous judgment. It's required. It's not always easy. But when we judge a situation, let's make sure that we judge it righteously. Very briefly on the end, I want to go over another section that I dealt with in that merit badge class. And it says, describe your ideas on how you can and will support others with different identities to feel included and heard at your school, workplace, and/or social settings in your community. How do we go about dealing with these people that are different, that are viewing things differently than us? How as Christians do we interact with these people? The way I approach this question is that we all have a right to be heard. I have a right to be heard. You have a right to be heard. And we have an obligation to listen to other people. But yet, as we listen, we need to be listening like the Bereans. In Acts chapter 17 and verse 11, it says, "Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the Scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true." And so the Bereans, they were more than happy to listen to what Paul was stating. They're like, "Yes, Paul, tell us." But as Paul told them these things, they were going directly to the Scriptures to check out to see if what Paul was stating was in harmony with the Scriptures. And so we have an obligation, as we said in our previous point, to listen, to ask questions, to investigate. And in doing so, I think simply by listening to someone, you can show a great amount of love. You turn on cable news this evening, how many people do you think you're going to find on cable news that's listening? You go and open your phone and look at social media. How many people on social media are listening? Not many. Everybody wants to be heard, but nobody wants to listen. But we all have the right to be heard. We need to be willing to listen to other people. We need to be willing to fully understand the situation that they are in. And in doing so, stopping and asking some questions, we might find a way that would help this person out of maybe a sin that they're involved in. Suppose someone came up to you this evening and asked you the question, do you believe all gay people are going to hell? Do you believe all gay people are going to hell? Well, how would you answer that question? Our first impulse would be to quickly answer yes. Yeah, they are. Yet, by asking the person exactly what they mean by gay could cause us to pause a little bit before we answer. If this person means someone who is actively participating or promoting homosexual behavior, then we might be justified in giving a quick answer. Yet what if this person is speaking about someone, even themselves, who is battling same-sex attraction? They are battling this temptation to be attracted to someone of their same sex. The desire and temptation are there, but they are endeavoring to overcome it. They are wondering if they are condemned to hell because of the temptation, that they're even tempted by that. Do we automatically condemn such a one? Or do we try to support that person in their efforts to overcome that temptation? If we leave that conversation and say, yes, all gay people are going to hell and that's the end of it, and we push them away by that answer, where is that person going to go for the next question? It's probably not going to be to you. And eventually they're going to find somebody to listen to them and to speak to them and try to get to the bottom of exactly what they're talking about. How we answer in that moment could change the course of a life. And brothers and sisters, I'm here to tell you, I'm not talking in hypotheticals right now. I'm not talking in hypotheticals. These are real questions with real consequences that real people are dealing with right now. Young people are inundated with all of this so-called knowledge and acceptance and things like that. They're being brainwashed at school. It's coming in on social media. It's coming in from everywhere. And if we think that our children can't be confused by these things, we are sadly mistaken. And we are blind. So how do we interact? How do we approach a situation like that? How would we treat a recovering alcoholic or a drug addict if they came to us with their struggles and their temptations to drink or to do drugs? I've heard it said that, once an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. You're always going to have that desire to drink, but yet someone can turn from that, but yet that temptation always be there. What do we do? Do we totally disregard that struggling Christian because they've got that temptation to drink? Or do we support them? Do we encourage them? Do we try our best to help them? What's the most loving thing? What would Christ do? We are called upon to listen and to understand before we condemn. And I can't say it enough. If you have a young person that approaches you wanting to speak about these things, do not brush it off. Do not be quick to make blanket statements and blanket condemnations and start speaking about things that's going to turn them away, because they're going to find someone eventually to talk to that's going to listen to them. They will eventually find people like that. And if it's not a Christian, things are going to go bad. Do not disregard these things, however innocent they may be. Too much is on the line. And so I think we've all learned the merit badge tonight. There may be someone here who needs to make correction. We have an opportunity right now. You may never have rendered initial obedience. You have an opportunity to confess your belief in Christ, to be baptized, and to begin your walk in service to Him tonight. Or there may be someone here who has done that, but you've fallen away. You may be struggling. There may be any number of things that you need help with. We're ready for you to come forward, for you to confess those things, to let us know, how can we help you? Can we pray? Let us pray for you. Let us ask God to forgive you, and then you can repent of those things, and then God won't remember them anymore. You have an opportunity to do either one tonight if you need to. So please come as together we stand and sing.